Welcome everybody to another episode of the new Hotness, your weekly digest of all things alternative cycling. Lots of interesting things in this week's show, so let's get into it. The first story is an alternative take on cycling shoes and pedals. This is definitely an interesting design. The company is 9.8, and as the title here suggests, it puts traction pins on your shoes. So it looks like you can do this a couple ways. We've got some examples here. So if you have an SPD skate shoe style riding shoe, you would use this cleat adapter that would replace the cleat and put studs in it. You can do this with mountain bike shoes, with road shoes. And interestingly, they also sell the studs themselves, so you can put the studs on pre-existing shoes. So on hiking boots, on sandals. And on the other end, you have the pedal, which instead of having traction pins is this grippy rubber. I think this is kind of an interesting paradigm shift application. It would definitely make sense for something like fat biking, where the traction pins would be useful in walking on icy conditions. I know that this would have been great when we were living in Missoula. Another place where I think this would actually work is if you were going bike fishing. Laura and I used to go fly fishing a lot, and we'd have wading shoes with traction pins in them, and they never interfaced well with alloy pedals. But if we had pedals with like this tacky rubber surface, it would actually work. Problematic, however, if you're going to walk into a business or a cafe or anything with wood floors in the middle of a bike ride, because not only would you have the clickety clack of cleats, but you'd be doing some damage to the floor surface. So probably not the best idea for every single ride, but I can see like very specific scenarios where this would actually make a lot of sense. Okay, let's talk bike packing bags. The next one is kind of an update, a refresh of bags from our friends over at Bags by Bird. You guys know we're big fans of their bags. And this is a bag called the Upper Hand. So it's a half frame style bag, but the main feature here is instead of using zippers, the closure is replaced with a flap. I've actually reviewed an older iteration of this bag and it works surprisingly well. The idea came about with Jay's journeys on some really remote bikepacking trips where he saw one of the first things to break is a zipper. There's a lot fewer parts to break. There's an elastic bungee and a hook, and generally those things, it would take a lot to break those things. On one side of the bike, you have this big main compartment with a fairly healthy slot. I feel like with some wiggling in, you could definitely put in a pump. I don't know about tent poles. You have to see if that closure was big enough. On the opposite side, there's also another entry flap, but for a little bit narrower space. This is where you'd put your phone or other small items. I can definitely see if you're paranoid about breaking things, if you're going into a super dusty and dirty environment and don't want to deal with your zippers breaking down, this is an interesting option. You do, of course, have to be a little bit more cautious if you've got lots of water crossings, making sure the flap is closed if you carry the bike over your head so things don't fall out. But otherwise, nice to see that Jay is still refining this design. You can check it out on his website at bagsbybird.com. He's got a couple of different size options and the retail price, MSRP, is $120. Another release from a small brand that is definitely answering a question that I get a lot, especially if you're a fan of putting a Caredice bag on your handlebars, is where do I put the light? Where do I put the light? I can't put it on the handlebars, where do I put it? This light mount accessory from the UK brand Wizardworks is trying to answer that problem. With basically this offset light mount, by moving it off to the side, it creates less interference if you're running a really big saddlebag in the front or a big roll. But it still keeps it fairly high up, so hopefully it doesn't cast a shadow as much with the wheel. In these photos, you can see it's being used with a dynamo light, but supposedly if you're running a battery-powered light and combine it with something like the Geno light mount from Paul or something similar, you can use non-dynamo lights as well. This is literally dropping, I think, either today or this week. The folks over at Wizardworks are sending me one to test out. I'm going to be using it with primarily battery-powered lights because I don't have a dyno on me at the moment. But pretty cool solution, especially if you want to keep that light slightly higher up than you can get with a Geno mount. Or if, like in this picture, you're running bags on the 3-pack mounts and a Geno light just won't work, This offset light mount will still give you a good spot to put your light. Moving right along, another big release this week is an update on the Salsa Fargo. Still pretty much its classic design. I don't think the geometry has changed. The biggest update to this bike is that it's still using these sliding alternator mounts, but this time the mounts are for flat mount brakes. So a lot easier if you're going to run a Hydro GRX component group set. The Fargo also inherits a much more svelte fork, so not the big chunky fork of old. And I believe this is the same fork that's coming off the Cutthroat. The bike's offered in two materials. You can get a steel version as well as a titanium version. I think a titanium version would be pretty sweet. It still says it's also compatible with 1x and 2x drivetrains, which is nice because sometimes you just need a lower gear that you can get with a 1x. So a little bit more of a small evolutionary change rather than something super revolutionary from Salsa. Another new old bike has been teased out by the UK brand Brother. This is a bike that they're calling the Pinecone, still in prototype stages, but basically it's kind of a direct homage to the 80s and 90s and early aughts mountain bikes. It definitely has that old school aesthetic, even down to the decals that they're rocking here. Again, this is a prototype, so lots of things will change. But nice thin budding, levelish top tube like the old school mountain bikes. Here it says that the rear chainstay length is 440, so typically much longer than the retro mountain bikes. And it also has a slightly slacker head tube angle at 70 degrees, as opposed to the steeper head tube angles of 80s or 90s mountain bikes. What that translates to is that it should be able to maintain a little bit more stability on chonky terrain. Also perhaps a slightly longer front center so you won't endo as immediately as you would on an 80s mountain bike. Another interesting thing is updated tire clearance. It states here that with 650B wheels, it can have a tire clearance up to 2.6 inches or potentially more at a squeeze. And it can also take both rim and disc brakes, a la surly bikes of yore. So I suspect with a 700C wheel, you can use the rim brake mounts. They're rocking V-brakes here. Other things that this bike has that the retro mountain bike doesn't. Oh, there are pictures. Let's take a closer look. Is 3-pack mounts. Old retro mountain bikes didn't have that. This does maintain that levelish top tube, but you can see a nice big clearance. I don't know if you guys have used V-brakes recently, but they still work pretty dang well. It's what I've got on my Rivendell. It's just awesome. In terms of answering, why not just buy a retro mountain bike? Well, aside from the multi-wheel size, the slightly updated geometry, you can get the bike in a size you want and aren't, left to what's available at the local swap meet or something. So if you want that new school ride and aesthetics without playing used bike roulette, then this might be an interesting option. One thing I do hope that they change from older mountain bikes is those bikes tended to have like really low stack. That's why you'd always see those like ridiculously long stems that pointed upwards. Hopefully they address that, or at least leave the steer tube longer so you can put some spacers and get the bars up. I don't know how promising that is here because it is running some fairly tall riser bars, but yeah, we'll see. Again, this is the Brother Cycles Pinecone, not yet on the market. And now for something completely different. This is from the brand Sugino, and it's your capacity booster. They offer it both for Shimano 11 and 12 speed. And what it does is that it replaces pre-existing pulley wheels on a Shimano rear derailleur. I think there's an increase in tooth count, but probably more importantly is it's offset and eccentric. And what this does is that it allows the same rear derailleur to take up more chain slack. They've got a really interesting video on the YouTube listing showing how it works, but you can see the center of the pulley wheel is eccentric, so that moves around. You get a pair of them for 11 and 12 speed. They look very similar, and you can see how it moves within the derailleur cage of a Shimano rear derailleur. I don't think it's oscillating like that the entire time you're pedaling. It kind of settles into one position, but by virtue of it moving, it just happens to take up more capacity. So they're going to show a sample here. Where it makes the biggest difference is in the small combination. Here it's flashing the alternative chain rings that you can run, 5233. That's down from 5236, or 5032, and that's down from 5034. So here's a clip of the original pulleys. If you're going to run a bigger, wider chainring combination, and in the small, you can see it's really saggy. And this is what it looks like with the capacity boosters. So it gives you the ability to take up that chain slack. And that's pretty cool. It says the guide pulleys adjust its position to the cog on the same principle. And supposedly it's supposed to shift just as well as it would with the native cog set. But yeah, you can see that the wheels aren't like oscillating around. They kind of settle into a position and just take up that excess chain. So wow, that's actually a really cool innovation. Next thing we're going to look at in the weird and wonderful is on printables, a good source for finding strange things. First off, there is the Suntour command shifters that you guys would probably know about. You can get a new iteration of this from the Soma Fab Store, or you can print your own. So this is pretty cool, but what I wanted to show you guys was actually this take on it. So instead of just having two pedals, this has like a 3-spoke shifting design, so it's a lot easier to access the shifter in its various throws. Supposedly this still works with a 12-speed cassette. I'm not quite sure, like, do you have to provide the shifting mechanism? Is it just the mount? What exactly is going on? But some folks were talking about this in our Discord. I thought I would highlight it on this episode. And lastly, it's time for Signal Boost, where I highlight small channels, small bike businesses, small Instagram accounts that are doing interesting things in my opinion. And this first one is the Paul Brody. I'd best describe as like Adam Savage's Tested, but for bicycles and motorcycles. Paul Brody was a mountain bike builder, kind of a contemporary of Tom Ritchie and that original California crew based in Canada. He built bikes for Rocky Mountain before stepping out on his own, and he's an absolute wealth of just mountain bike knowledge. His channel is awesome because he goes not only through the history of mountain biking, but he also builds stuff. He's got a video here on building a Tom Ritchie inspired biplane fork. He's got another video here on laying out the geometry and the tubing for a gravel bike. Doing it very old school, not using CAD, but just a ruler and a big sheet of paper. He's got a video here on using a lathe and milling down a seat post clamp. And it's a super interesting look into what it takes to actually build small bike components, from working with a raw piece of material and cutting it down until it's a finished product. Probably one of my favorite videos is this one. This is a true story of Brody bikes, a little bit of a personal history, but also a look at the time capsule of mountain biking through his eyes. He talks about various products that he helped develop, like the brake booster, the Gator Blade fork. I think it's super fascinating to hear it straight from the person that was developing these products back in that time. Another really cool video that you guys should check out is his Shop Talk video talking with Ross Schaefer. This is the guy that started Salsa Cycles, before it was sold to QBP. So a lot of insights into what frame building was like back then, the whole emerging scene in mountain biking. They talk about the greater Salsa Circle and the big parties that Salsa was known for throwing, and how Ross Schaefer was able just to create a really cool vibe around a brand. So if you haven't seen his channel already, definitely check out Paul Brody on YouTube. And the next one is Para la gente en España. Es una grupa de chicas que muchísima chula. Es una grupa se llama Rare Femmes y ellas hacen eventos de bikepacking cerca de Madrid. So super rad group of women based out of Madrid doing bikepacking events. They had their first one last year, and it was a base camp model. Super cool turnout, really chill, kind of choose your own adventure. And the next one they are doing is in the spring, and they're going to a location that we were just at, and this is in southern Spain near the Badlands route. Pretty amazing destination, reminded us a lot of Idaho, of Eastern Oregon, of the Dakotas. Super rugged landscape. It's actually where they film lots of the old spaghetti westerns with like Clint Eastwood. When we were there just last week, there was an old Hollywood soundstage and there was a western show. Just fascinating scenery, mind-blowing to be in all that emptiness after living in the city again here in Spain. If you happen to live in Spain and want to join a women's bikepacking group, they put on rad events, and definitely check out the Rare Femmes. What was your favorite thing from this week's The New Hotness? Let me know in the comments below. If you guys like this format, definitely let me know. Please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. That's the best way to do it, so we can keep covering this alternative side of cycling, because we have no major sponsors. We're supported by you guys, our Patreon supporters, and those of you that pick up stickers and other merch from our merch store. So if you like this content, you guys know what to do, and as always, keep the supple side down.